Are you disputing that we talked about the frogs already?
Because we didn't do it yet.
I think she said we didn't do it yet.
I have asterisk on my notes where I left off. So, you just got frogs on the brain.
And I canceled something yesterday.
No, we didn't dwell too much on like what kind of frog it was or anything like that. So.
Frog is a frog. Didn't say crows.
Some are poisonous, some aren't.
Yeah. They use the indigenous peoples of South America use frogs they just get the skin and get the poison for their arrows that way. So. That's quite all right. Gesundheit.
Where are you going?
We're going to pick up in chapter 8 at verse 20. So we are in Exodus chapter 8, begin verse 20. We don't have anybody logged on yet, but we'll see. Yes. The knit gnats. We talked a little bit about the gnats, and these are translations and kind of what we normally call them traditional. It's a little bit unclear the words exactly what animals or creatures they're referring to, and that's okay. Could have been mosquitoes or lice or something like that. It was not pleasant, and as we talked about last time, there's no indication that they go away. That may be something that they just had to live with. As a result, it's also one of those plagues that there's a lot of redundancy in each plague. They kind of follow a little bit of a formula, but there's also some variation. And in the plague of the gnats or lice or mosquitoes or whatever they are, there's no opportunity to obey to keep it from happening. It just happens. So it just comes on, and then it, as far as we know, continues. Perhaps it ends with the flies, but we aren't really told that. Verses 20, Exodus chapter 8, verses 20 through 32. Excuse me. Now the Lord said to Moses, rise early in the morning and present yourself before Pharaoh as he comes out to the water, and say to him, thus says the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. For if you do not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies on you and on your servants and on your people and into your houses, and the houses of the Egyptians will be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground on which they dwell. But on that day I will set apart the land of Goshen, where my people are living, so that no swarms of flies will be there, in order that you may know that I, the Lord, am in the midst of the land. I will put a division between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign will occur. Then the Lord did so, and there came great swarms of flies into the house of Pharaoh and the houses of his servants, and the land was laid waste because of the swarms of flies in all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, go sacrifice to your God within the land. But Moses said, it is not right to do so, for we will sacrifice to the Lord our God what is an abomination to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice what is an abomination to the Egyptians before their eyes, will they not stone us? But we must go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as he commands us. Pharaoh said, I will let you go that you may sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness, only you shall not go very far away. Make supplication for me. Then Moses said, behold, I am going out from you, and I shall make supplication to the Lord, that the swarms of flies may depart from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people tomorrow. Only do not let Pharaoh deal deceitfully again, in not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. So Moses went out from Pharaoh and made supplication to the Lord. The Lord did as Moses asked and removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people. Not one remained. But Pharaoh hardened his heart this time also, and he did not let the people go. Okay. What do we think about that?
Pharaoh's not very smart.
Yeah. Not at all.
He sounds like a lot of men, doesn't he?
He's not smart.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
This is not about the flies, it's about the frogs.
Okay.
When they had all the frogs in their beds, in their tables, everywhere, and Moses came and said, well, when do you want them to go away? He didn't say right now, he said tomorrow. Now, why was that? Why would you want them to stay? That'd be like saying the flies, well, we'll be in Texas, the flies will be here tonight. But we'll go back to Washington, they won't be here tomorrow.
Well, I don't know exactly what Pharaoh's reasoning was on that, but the way it worked out is another opportunity for God to demonstrate his power. The frogs come, and then there's an appointed time for them to
If
die.
your bed was full of frogs, would you say, well, just let them stay tonight and we'll send them home tomorrow?
If I had, my Cajun sister-in-law there, and she wanted to cook up some frog legs, I don't know. It's Pharaoh is given the opportunity to be in control to some
Maybe
extent.
He still wants to be in charge.
Yeah, he is. He's given that opportunity to have control, and God, in a sense, does what Pharaoh requests,
Yeah, I know that.
and it demonstrates God's power over the situation.
Why he would say that?
If you want me to explain Pharaoh, I can't do that. I don't understand. So
Well, I agree with Dolores, but I mean, it just goes to who Pharaoh is. I mean, what, after his first plague, why didn't you do,
Well, think how all of his people must have felt.
Yeah.
Well, the stupid king, here, he's letting us suffer another day when we could have been through this.
well, and remembering the plague of frogs, in a sense, the plague begins once it ends. And when the frogs die, that's kind of that in a sense is the beginning of the plague, really. I mean, the frogs are a nuisance before, but they befoul the land by their rotting corpses. Driving through Texas last week, we saw quite a few critters on the side of the road. And
Texas has lots of flies.
they did. We didn't have a problem with flies. We drove by one ranch, and there were these 5 critters they had shot, and they were all strung up, hanging upside down along the fence, like right together. And I don't know, what in the world are those animals? And I think later on, they were coyotes.
Well,
I
they
think
put them up there, so maybe the others would
Yeah.
see him and not come.
Yeah, I don't know exactly why they did it, but that's most of those coyotes aren't as smart as the one on the cartoon, So
Not wily guys.
yeah, and you see what happens to him all the time. He ends up kind of suffering at his own. He's hung on his own petard there, or whatever, however that saying goes. So,
Okay,
but
back to the flies.
well, okay,
I have a question.
yes, ma'am.
Because it said the land was ruined by the swarms of flies. That's locusts that usually eat everything. What do the flies do to the winter?
Well, that's a good point. We haven't gotten to the locust yet, but all of these plagues kind of combine in a sense. The frogs ruin the land too, and certainly having the river turn into blood ruins the land. There's this ruination of this land of Egypt. Normally you'd think, if you look at any political global situation, you would want to live in the wealthiest, most powerful nation you could. That would be the most desirable place to live, because that's where the wealth is, that's where the security is. You would want to be there. And God is taking the most wealthy, powerful empire that had ever existed and making it uninhabitable for human beings. When I was at Aberdeen, we had a really bad windstorm one year, and we had a bunch of tall trees around. They had the congregation owned a parsonage. I lived in the parsonage, and it knocked some big trees down on top of my roof, and the parsonage roof. When I say I know I didn't own it. It's occupied by other people right now, so I know I didn't own it. But I lived there, and so they were kind of a danger. The roof was open a little bit. I mean, there was not the ceiling, but the roof was open, and it took out the power, and the water system in the area had gotten polluted and was not drinkable. So my house had no electricity, it wasn't weatherproof, and it didn't have any potable water. That sounds like an uninhabitable house to me. And for a week or so, that's what it was. That is what God has done, in a sense, through these natural, supernatural to be sure, but using animals that are within the land. He has made Egypt just reprehensible, miserable, certainly, but just undesirable. You don't want to live there, even though it has all these other things going for it.
And then, in motion, we're in the flies. So he is showing his power by restricting it to the land of the Egyptians rather than his people.
Yes, this is the first. We've had all these other plagues, and certainly the Israelites. So there was still water somewhere because the magicians were able to turn water into blood as well. It may be not a big step to suppose that Israel is already being at least somewhat protected from the effects of these plagues, but with this plague, it is clear God is making he's discriminating against the Egyptians. He's drawing a line around his people and visiting the plagues on their oppressors rather than on them, and protecting and shielding them. And God has this capacity to, this is what God does for Israel once they're in the promised land and surrounded by their enemies. They can have these horrible, very violent, very powerful enemies all around them, and they can sit there, and God is teaching them, I will keep you safe. You don't need a king. You don't need big standing armies. You don't need all these other things going on. I can do it. They don't really trust him. They don't really believe him. The lack of faith, whatever. They get a king. They get armies. They have all the problems that go along with that. Ultimately, they're led again into Babylonian captivity. And, the message, if you're a Hebrew, a Jew in Babylonian captivity, longing to be brought back to your homeland, the message is, well, some might say, well, if you get back there, you're going to be weak and ineffectual. You'll just fall into somebody else's captivity. No. If we get back there, God can take care of us. God will protect us. And God says, I can scatter you to the four corners of the earth, and then I can bring you right back again. Distinctly. You and nobody else. He can find all the needles in all the haystacks. That's this power is being demonstrated. I can protect you no matter what is going on around you. The idea of it ruining the land shows, though, that it affects every level of Egyptian. While the Israelites, the Hebrews, whatever you want to call them, are totally free from this plague, every single Egyptian is impacted by it. Even the house of Pharaoh. I don't know how y'all feel about flies, but I don't like them very much. So, I don't know. I dislike mice and I dislike flies. I guess you just have to learn to live with flies a little bit. They kind of get in. They are dirty. So we don't like those either. But you couldn't escape. You couldn't escape it by being wealthier, more powerful, more servants. That doesn't get you out of it. I'm guessing even the rich folks around here, when the flies are pretty bad, even the rich folks around here have them in their house.
There's not flies here compared to Texas.
There's not flies here, and they're bigger in Texas too, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything's bigger in Texas.
There's a lot more.
Is there a lot more?
Yeah.
Well, I guess they know where to go.
Yeah.
Down south, there's more bugs in there.
Well, there's certainly more cockroaches in Texas because when I was growing up, my mom kept a meticulous house and we still had to fight them. Dad had to spray and he had access to stuff that you couldn't just buy off the shelf. So, and we still had to do it every few months. So, the warmer, moister climate that you had in South Texas was a problem for that. I've never seen a cockroach in Washington. I don't know if y'all have them or don't, but I've never seen one. We have, and we have fire ants in Texas. There's all these wonderful things that Texas has that we did see. Also, one of the dead critters we saw was a wild hog somebody had shot and left on the side of the road. So the hogs are those wild hogs are a problem in the South, not just Texas, but Louisiana, other places, destroy a lot of land. So, I mean, these are kind of minor examples, or depends on if it's your ranch or not, how minor it is. But nature can, endemic creatures can spoil the land. The animals that are kind of supposed to be there, although I don't know, I mean, the hogs are not, I guess are not. They're tame hogs that got loose and went crazy. That's what razorbacks do. I got to tell you, they get loose and they go crazy. But they tore up the land, and these creatures, and that's one of the things that's commonality with all of these plagues here in chapter 8, whether it's the frogs, the lice, gnats, mosquitoes, whatever they are, or these flies. These are all animals, all creatures that naturally exist in Egypt. This is something from within that is multiplied to a level that it becomes a really big problem, that ruins the land. And in a sense, these animals represent Israel. I'm not trying to say that to be anti-Semitic. I'm not trying to say that they're frogs, lice, or flies or anything. I'm saying that they are a population that is within Egypt, and their numbers are growing, and Egypt perceives these, people within their land as becoming a danger, becoming a threat, potentially ruining the empire. They perceive, in a sense, correctly. It's not that they're wrong. It's not that the Hebrews don't pose a threat, or that the Hebrews aren't prospering, aren't numerous, aren't becoming mighty. They are. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Sometimes we see things as they are. We see them accurately. The question, though, remains, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to respond? One of the common kind of motivational teaching points right now is that it's not what happens, it's how you respond to it.
I think I could deal with the gnats and the flies rather than that thing that crawl on the ground.
You don't like those frogs?
It wouldn't bother me. It's the snake.
The snake, okay.
Those things that crawl around.
They don't have any snakes in Texas, do they, Dolores? We didn't see any snakes. One time we were back in Arkansas around spring break, and I guess it had just gotten warm. I don't know what, we were driving through some hilly back roads, and every 50 yards, it seemed like there was a dead snake on the side of the road. They'd all come out at once and all gotten run over about the same time, it seemed like. But that's so. They hadn't got sent snakes. I guess that's that's a plague that goes on to Israel, isn't it? Later on down the road, they're the ones who get the snakes. So we seeing this plague, this narrative, we see that Egypt has to deal with something from within. And it kind of continues a little bit into chapter 9. But soon the plagues are kind of, maybe you could say, from without. The hail being brought down upon Egypt, the darkness, the other things are kind of brought onto Egypt. And this is kind of, these first plagues kind of come up from within Egypt. We sing that song, Just As I Am, and it has the lyric, fears within and foes without. And this is foes within and foes without. I mean, because they're fighting God. God says in our reading today, I am within the land. I'm here. I've shown up. Now, we know God is everywhere at all times, but at the same time, sometimes he shows up. Johnny Cash's song, When the Man Comes Around. Well, the man's here. And again, this is all, in a sense, motivation to get his people out of Egypt, but it is also retribution. This is punishment. They have, and we see that more again as we get into chapter 9, they have committed genocide against the Jews. They have oppressed them. They have treated them terribly. And they are getting punished for that. We have a penal institution here in our fair city. And a lot of times the people say today that, going to prison should be about rehabilitation. Hopefully rehabilitation is accomplished, but to some extent it's just about punishment. And if you don't think it is about punishment, then you probably haven't been as victimized as others have. When it's your friend, relative, loved one that's killed, if the guy goes to prison for 2 years after he murders your daughter, you might not think he was punished enough for that. You may hope he is rehabilitated, but you might think my daughter is gone forever, and he's inconvenienced for 2 years. That might be how you look at it. Well, Israel has been victimized. They have been oppressed. They have been murdered. They've been the victims of genocide. Pharaoh is guilty of it. The nation is guilty of it. And this is something we don't like to talk about too much today, about kind of corporate guilt, corporate liability or responsibility to mourn and to grieve and to repent corporately, not just personally. But Egypt is being judged here, not just Pharaoh, certainly not this Pharaoh. So I'm not saying now that we can plug and play again these stories right into our personal lives but I think we can draw from that. And we can see that right now the rottenness, if you will, of Egypt is percolating from up within itself. God is using that to oppress Egypt in a way that they have oppressed Israel. Any more thoughts on chapter 9? Frogs, flies, gnats, toad frogs, horny toads, before we move on?
Well, again, your point that God's using what is there. God is in control of what is there. He's able to take these things that are already there and do his will.
Okay. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes or so let's get into chapter 9 of Exodus. I know that was not advertised, but that's what we're doing. Exodus chapter 9, verses 1 through 7. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and speak to him. Thus says the Lord, of the God of the Hebrews, let my people go that they may serve me. For if you refuse to let them go and continue to hold them, behold, the hand of the Lord will come with a very severe pestilence upon your livestock, which are in the field, on the horses and on the donkeys and on the camels, on the herds and on the flocks. But the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of Egypt, so that nothing will die of all that belongs to the sons of Israel. The Lord set a definite time, saying, tomorrow the Lord will do this thing in the land. So the Lord did this thing on the next day, and all the livestock of Egypt died. But of the livestock of the sons of Israel, not one died. Pharaoh sinned, and behold, there was not even one of the livestock of Israel dead. But the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and he did not let the people go. What do we think about that?
I took a lot of you'd say the wealth, because the wealth is in their stock.
Okay.
This really had, to me, it was that big, not just an impact. Again, you've got all these dead animals, people,
Mm-hmm.
the smell and the odor and all that, but the wealth of Egypt now is being hit pretty hard.
I have an online friend, I guess you'd say, it's a young guy who lived in Houston, and they had a hurricane. I don't know if it was Hurricane Ike or which one it was. It came through, knocked out the power for a while, and they knew it was going to be out for a few days at least. So the neighborhood, again, we're going back to Texas, but they had a huge big block party. Everybody got their propane grills out, and because their freezer, all the meat and stuff, everything in their freezer was going to be ruined. So, have a big barbecue. That's Texas too. They, whenever when in doubt, have a barbecue. And so they had a big grill, big block party, and everything. And they're able to celebrate because they know this is temporary, but it's also, they're losing it anyway. So the Egyptians could go out and say, well, we're going to have a barbecue. Look at all our dead cattle. But it's not just the meat in the freezer they're losing. I mean, this is the breeding stock. This is very harmful to their well-being. And I think maybe the most important distinction about this plague is that it is very much about life and death. And I know the frogs have already died and the flies went away and all, but this is about animals that mattered to them dying.
This is their livelihood. This is their.
This is life and death. The animals die. And it's perhaps a culmination of the ruination of the land. If the land is ruined, the livestock are going to suffer as a result of that. But this is, again, God in this, looking at the mechanics of it, there is no opportunity to obey. Actually, there is here. I'm sorry, there's another one where there is not an opportunity to obey. But there is no use of Moses and Aaron in this one. Moses doesn't lift up his staff and bring this about. This isn't used by him. This is life and death, and it's in the hand of God. God is bringing about death. These are creatures God created. We talk about the animal. We've already talked about animals we don't like, certainly not in the house, and we don't like to live with, and all that. They're all creatures of God, though, aren't they? God made the mice. He made the flies. He made all these things. And the role they have in our lives varies. Some people have pet mice. I don't know if anybody has a pet fly or not, but they're probably not that affectionate. But they probably also don't hang around that long. But if you have a pet frog, having some pet flies might not be a bad idea. But
Don't keep them in the same place.
so if you have a pet mouse and a pet cat, don't keep them in the same cage either. So, but they have a role. God, they're all creatures of God, and it's sometimes kind of I think an American postmodern, maybe not even postmodern, post-enlightenment idea that humans are so favored by God that animals don't really matter in God's sight. And you can see that maybe basis for that in this story where all these livestock are killed. They don't just cease to exist. They don't disappear. They die.
Then later on, though, he And that's people.
That's people and animals again, but it's also there. We'll see later on in the plague of hail that God is very much concerned about the livestock.
Yeah, tells them to bring their livestock in.
Yes, and we can also see in the story of Jonah that God is concerned about not just the people, this great city of Nineveh. He's also worried about all the cattle that are there too. And when Israel goes into the promised land, God says, I'm not going to give it to you all at once partly because the wild animals will be too much for you. He's going to give nature, in a sense, if he just wipes out all of the Gentiles and gives, as Israel takes possession, there's this balance that has to be struck between nature and human economy, human agriculture, human activity. And it's something we still kind of struggle with. Killing 5 coyotes and hanging them up on your fence. If you have cattle, if you have sheep or goats or something like that, you can understand why you don't want coyotes. But guess who is here first, the cattle or the coyotes? And we live, near places that have wolves. Do they have wolves around here? Okay, there's some wolves.
Oh, yeah.
And they can do a lot of damage to cattle and herds and all that too. Guess who was here first? And it's easy to say that when it's not your cattle, and that's not my cattle. But it's, I think it has to be a balance. We have to look at the created order. God put these animals here for a reason. Maybe we can't always discern that reason, but that doesn't mean he didn't have one. And it's true of grizzly bears. It's true of black bears. It's true of cougars. I married a cougar, so I know what that's all about. So you got to protect the cougars sometime, But when the cougar's attacking you and biting your neck and trying to kill you, it's maybe a little bit different matter. But it's easy to take some of these stories in isolation and draw conclusions that aren't very accurate. That God doesn't care about the rest of creation. He only cares about humans. I don't think that's reflective of the whole of Scripture. I think that's picking and choosing and taking an isolated story out and saying, see, he doesn't care about you could say the same thing, he doesn't care about the Egyptians. I think when we get there, we're going to see he cares very much about the Egyptians. Yes, sir.
I'm thinking of Adam and Eve, and when they're driven out of the garden, it not only says that man is going to have a problem, but that the whole earth groans.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just a problem of man, it's a problem of God's creation that has a problem because man has sinned and has, and I'm still confused a little bit about the fact that the garden is beautiful, but now they're going out to an area where there's weeds, where they have to toil. So does that mean there were no weeds in the Garden of Eden? So there's nothing they had to do other than just enjoy the garden?
No, they were to bless and keep it. They were to bless the garden.
They didn't have to work by the sweat of their
Mhm.
brow, because he seemed to make
It was the clothes that made them sweaty. When they were running around naked, they weren't sweaty.
Maybe that, whatever it is, there is a change.
Yes.
There is a big change from
Yes.
before and after, and not only that, the earth itself.
The garden is a subset of creation. The garden is a place within creation. It's not all of creation itself. So that's an example to as the kingdom. We are in God's kingdom. There is around us. It's not that God's kingdom has literal geographic limitations, but it has theological, spiritual demarcations.
It has a connection to God, whereas the rest, the way it is, there are people in this world who do not believe there is a God. Well, that's part of his kingdom, but yet there's no believers there. They don't believe in God.
Yeah, well, the term kingdom is also maybe understood as reign. And so God's reign, R-E-I-G-N, not R-A-N, R-E-I-G-N, is where God is, in a sense, acknowledged and given authority, people who will submit to his authority. And we're trying to grow that. We're trying to bring others into submission. And ultimately, God has everything. He can bring about whatever he wants. He is showing the most powerful nation on the world, I can do whatever I want to you.
Egypt isn't part of it. It's just that they don't acknowledge him. The Pharaoh especially, now the other Egypt.
So they are not his people. And one thing I wanted, forgot to mention about the flies back in chapter 8, when they are gone completely, when they are removed completely, Egypt is now experiencing Israel's reality. That was already Israel's reality. No flies. You can have anyone, in a sense, I guess you could say, can have the reality of God's people if they obey God. You can share in it. To bless Israel, in this context, to bless Israel is to receive blessing yourself, is to be blessed. And there we've seen that throughout the story of the patriarchs. The people who bless the patriarchs are blessed. Those who curse, even inadvertently curse the patriarchs, are cursed themselves. And when they reconcile with the patriarchs, the curse is removed. So, as bad as it was, Israel spared. The hope of Israel, the reality of Israel, can be shared by those who bless Israel. Now, ultimately, Egypt didn't do it when they said they were. Pharaoh didn't do it when he said he was going to do it. But so another curse comes on. That Israel is once again spared. The livestock of Egypt suffer horribly. The livestock of Israel are fine. And Pharaoh goes out to double check that. It is exactly as he was told. It happens right when it's told, and in exactly how it was told. Egyptian livestock are devastated. Israel's livestock are untouched. Okay. We'll pick up. We're not quite done with that. We'll pick up with that story next week and then continue in Exodus chapter 9. Thank you for your attention and comments. And Mr.